Is this story that a photo like this is my actual worst nightmare. It's Julie Watts and her husband Jonathan, and on December 2nd, 2017, Julie was home alone when her phone pinged, detecting motion in the downstairs camera. This was the frame that was shown on her phone. Before we dive in, if you're a fan of true crime, make sure to go click the link in my bio to listen to my podcast, Creep Time the Podcast, on Spotify or Apple. She saw this photo and she immediately jumps into action. She locks her bedroom door, she calls 911, she starts texting her husband Jonathan, who's all the way in Minneapolis on business. After a few minutes, she gets another alert on her phone that there was motion detected in the downstairs bedroom. This was the photo sent to her phone. I know it's hard to see, but if you flip this picture upside down, it is somebody who is back crawling out of a closet. Julie did not survive this attack, as when police arrived, they came upon a gruesome display where Julie's hands had been taken. Police had no idea who could have done this. This was the final text exchange that was surfaced from her phone.
Can you tell a place has a dark history just from looking at it? In this series, I'm showing you some photos so you can see. And I cover all sorts of spooky and true crime stuff on this page, so follow along. This is the Wisconsin home of Ed Gein, also known as the Butcher of Plainfield. There's actually very few photos of this house that are in any way appropriate to share because of the nature of his crimes. It was in this house that Ed taught himself taxidermy after his mother passed away, and it was the local cemetery where he would go to rob graves and practice what he had learned. This is the room that Ed's mother lived in, and after she passed away, he had it completely sealed off and never touched it. This is in part why the movie Psycho was based on Ed Gein. Ed's mother would tell him all these crazy things, like that women were all guilty of lust and they were just sent to tempt men, which is why many people think that he specifically hated women. And you might be thinking that these photos were taken years after he was out of the house, maybe it had been abandoned for a while, but no, these are the conditions that Ed would live in. When robbing graves wasn't enough for Ed, he moved on to taking people's lives. And to this day, no one's definitively sure how many lives he took. But there's a real darkness to these photos, and if you're brave enough to look up the other ones online, you can see how disturbed the person living there actually was.
A lot of people have this real deep fear of artificial intelligence and what it means for us in our future. Do you guys think that it'll eventually get to that?
I kind of feel like it could. If you think about humans versus animals, what makes us so special is our intelligence.
Exactly.
And if we program computer to do that, what stops them from then learning?
So I think what stops it is the ability to feel and actually adapt, right? Mm-hmm. So you can program a computer to learn within the parameters of what you've taught it to learn, but because it's not alive and experiencing and feeling real emotion and connecting with real life things, I think there's a limit to what it can do.
Say its parameters is save humanity, but it sees that free will is the thing that's hurting humanity. So
but it does not have emotion. This is where you're wrong. This is a humanistic thought. A computer created does not have emotion. It cannot feel emotion. It can't feel jealousy. It can't feel.
Where was emotion? I was just curious.
Because for you to say, well, I'm upset with how my life is. I want free will. Free will is better for me. That's an emotional reaction.
I'm not saying the artificial intelligence gets free will. I'm saying it's saying that humans having free will
is the worst. Okay, I get what you're saying.
Causing humans with free will is the reason we have war. That we have greed, that we have corruption in politics. But if it took over and enslaved humanity,
it would be protecting us from ourselves.
This is why I don't trust clowns. So this is the only photographic evidence that we have of the night clown, or payaso de noche, a clown that terrorized southern Texas in the early 2000s. In 2002, an absurd amount of dogs went missing in Texas. Some communities said that every dog on the block was gone. So one night, this 6-year-old girl, Sarah Martinez, wanders into the woods looking for her lost dog. She was missing for hours, and when they finally found her, she was curled up in a ball crying, claiming the payaso de noche had eaten her dog. Many people in the community chalked it up to her being like a little kid with a wild imagination, but soon other kids in the area started complaining about this. This drawing was submitted by a 2nd grade teacher to evidence. Tons of kids started drawing pictures just like this, claiming that their dogs also had been eaten by payaso de noche. And just like Pennywise, this is not the first time that this clown had been seen. Other sightings happened just outside of Mexico City in the 90s, and more recently in San Diego, where this photo was snapped.
Everybody thinks this video is fake until they see what's in the vent. In 2018, a group of urban explorers decided to check out this abandoned factory. As soon as they go inside, they see this warning on the wall. They go upstairs anyways and immediately hear voices from the floor above them. Instead of running away like normal people, they go up to have a look. They trace the voices back to this vent, so they think, and they take their camera and they slide it in to have a look. When they review the footage, they can't believe what they found.
So let me tell you about this case, Lars Mittank. So Lars Mittank was a German international. He was 28 years old, and he was on vacation in Bulgaria with a group of his friends. He was at this bar watching like a soccer game. He got into an argument with the opposing team's supporter. So they ended up getting into like this big old brawl. They like beat him up, and they apparently kidnapped him, and he was gone for a couple of days. His friends were super concerned. He came back and was like, nothing happened. It's all good. Y'all don't have to come and stay with me. He was so adamant about his friends not staying with him, right? Which in itself is a little weird. So anyways, he ended up going to the doctor, and he had a busted eardrum from the fight. So then things started getting weird. So the day after that, he started calling his mom, and he told her to cancel all of his credit cards. And he said, if anything happens to me, just know I was killed. Like, there's people after me and they're trying to hurt me. And his mom was like, what are you talking about? Whatever, like blah, blah, blah. Get on a flight and come home. So he goes to the airport the next day. He has all of his stuff. He's like, let me fly home. Like, I want to go home, right? They were like, well, you have a busted eardrum. You're not allowed to fly. He's then seen on CCTV footage in a full panic, just sprinting out of the airport in like this. It is honestly, the video is bone chilling. Like, he looks as if somebody is
Just
really
signed his death warrant.
Yeah, like really trying to get him. And I don't know if he believed that like everybody was in on this. I don't know what was going through his head, but the way that he reacted to not being able to fly was like, on the video, you see him run. He just keeps running, and he runs out of the camera sight, never to be seen again. Since that day, he has never been seen again.
I can confirm that this is a true story. In 2004, a 16-year-old boy who was staying with a friend in their cabin up in New Hampshire was having a hard time falling asleep. Around 3 a.m., he was still awake, and he remembers thinking how eerily quiet and totally pitch black the house was. And that's when he heard it. The front door opens and someone comes inside and begins walking through the house down the hallway right outside of his door where it stops. The door opens and the boy is instantly petrified because in walks this tall, shadowy figure that marches to the center of the room and then bows onto the ground and disappears. The boy stays up all night, terrified that this thing's gonna re-emerge and just look at him. Finally, he hears his friend's mom making coffee in the kitchen, so he runs out to tell her what happened. The whole time he's explaining what happened, she's just looking at him with sympathy in her eyes. And finally she says, "My husband visited me last night too." Her husband was dead, and I was that 16-year-old boy.
This is why I would never hire a stranger for a kid's birthday party. And if the photo's not bad enough, the mystery behind it is so much worse. And a reminder before I dive in that if you like all things spooky and true crime, check out my podcast. There's a link to it in my profile. So in the 1940s, the McLaren family in Houston, Texas was having a birthday party for their daughter, Rose. They hired a clown for the party, but an hour before the party started, they get a call from the company saying that the clown they hired was no longer available. They were going to send someone else in his place. And the parents were like, okay, fine, whatever. But then this man shows up to the party. And the kids are all terrified of him. No one really wants to take photos. The man stayed at the party for about 20 minutes and then just disappeared. But get this. After he left, the clown that they hired showed up to the party. And he apologized for being late. And the mother is like, what are you doing here? You canceled on us. And the clown's like, no, I didn't. And it was at that moment that one of the parents noticed that this little boy pictured here was missing. The little boy was never found, and the identity of this man remains a mystery even today.
So let me tell you about the lady who was dead in her apartment for 2 years before anyone ever noticed. It was this lady named Joyce Vincent, right? She was from the United Kingdom. Not much is known about her death at all. Eventually, the London police department went to go and take back the apartment because she hadn't paid rent. So let me tell you about the lady who was dead in her apartment for 2 years before anyone ever noticed. It was this lady named Joyce Vincent, right? She was from the United Kingdom. Not much is known about her death at all. Eventually, the London police department went to go and take back the apartment because she hadn't paid rent in 2 years. They were gonna go in and kick her out. She never came to the door. So they decided, okay, we're gonna get a key and we're just gonna come in and move your stuff out ourselves, right? So they opened the door, and when they walked in, it looked normal. I mean, it was pretty clean. It was some stuff in the house. There were presents that were unwrapped, Christmas presents. This is in July.
June, July,
Yeah. They keep looking around and they found her laying on the floor by her bed. But the worst part about that to me, right, is that
this video might be proof that we're living in a simulation.
Oops. That's freaking weird, man.
Isn't it?
Yeah, there's someone else taking a picture.
Right? It feels so weird because it should be moving.
Yeah, I don't see any I don't see anything
Right?
Somebody explain to me how this bird is dead and not moving, but it's in the sky. Some people think that it's a glitch in the Matrix, or some sort of hologram that the government is using, and they think that this goes hand in hand with all those alien sightings that we've been seeing. Maybe everything's like a hologram. I don't know. I'm confused.
What would you do in this terrifying situation? TikTok user Andy Winehouse said he was lying down at home one day when suddenly he heard his own voice call to him from the next room. And he filmed it all. Take a look.
Come here. Come here. Come here. Okay. Come here. Come here. What I told you. Come here. Okay, I don't know what to do. You can literally hear that. You can literally hear that. No. No.
Andy heard loud banging and strange noises, but when he opened the door, there was no one there. I don't scare easily, but this video, ooh. Who or what would be mimicking his voice? Have you ever heard of anything like this?
This is a story of a woman who saw her husband's dead uncle. Story time. This story was submitted by Leanna. I went ahead and tagged her down below. This story happened when Leanna and her husband were still boyfriend and girlfriend. One night, Leanna wakes up to the feeling of someone staring at her. When she opens her eyes, she looks across the room and sees this man standing there just waving at her. She could see him so clearly that she could see what he was wearing and the fact that he had glasses. He appeared to be pretty friendly, but regardless of this, it really freaked Leanna out. She ended up jumping under the covers and started to whisper, trying to get her boyfriend's attention. When he wakes up, she tells him about the man that she saw standing there staring at her. He looks over and sees nothing but the bare wall. There is absolutely nothing there. Leanna tried to calm herself down by telling herself that she may have just been seeing things. The next day, they go over to his parents' house when his mom tells him that his tío had just passed away the night before and that she was going to have to travel to Peru for his funeral. Being that he had been dealing with a long-term illness, they were expecting it, just weren't sure when it was going to happen. She ends up traveling to Peru and a week later comes back and shows them the funeral program.
Leanna's boyfriend grabs it and hands it over to her and says, "Here, so you can remember my tío." Side note, Leanna had never seen his uncle before. The minute she looked at the photo, her jaw dropped. That had been the same man who was waving at her in her room. His family joked with her and told her that maybe that was his way of welcoming her into the family. Regardless, that was the last time Leanna ever saw him.
She should have chosen a different apartment. Sally was moving into a new apartment when she notices a crawl space above the ceiling but thinks nothing of it. One night while watching TV, she is frightened by a tiny woman out on her fire escape trying to break in. She hides and calls the cops while the intruder tries to open the locked windows. Moments later, Sally hears something crawling around above her and notices one of the ceiling tiles was missing. Then a deranged woman appeared staring from the hole before scurrying off back into the crawl space. It took the police 3 days to take the deranged woman into custody. Follow because my next story is crazy.
This is proof that we aren't alone. Okay, so we all heard of and know what giants are. But I bet you didn't think they were real. What if I told you that there was so much evidence proving that giants existed? Not only did we discover footprints the size of a human being, but we also discovered multiple giant skeletons. Most people believe these are just some sort of giant apes that lived millions of years ago, but others believe they were actually giant humans. So, do you think giants existed one point in time?
I already know this video is going to show up at night for you. I don't care. You tell that there is something deeply wrong with this photo. It's discovered in a hidden lockbox after her grandfather had passed, and the woman who found it, Michaela Jerome, she thought the same thing that you did. There's something that's kind of off about this picture. Very quickly, if you're not already, make sure to go check out my podcast, The Scariest One You Know, Creep Time the Podcast. Can use the link in my bio. We're on Spotify and Apple. Well, the photo, she was almost sure, clearly showed the staircase of her family home, but she couldn't be sure about what this was in the center until she enhanced the photo. A hauntingly clear image of what appears to be a woman clawing her way up those stairs. She eventually turned in this photo for analysis with the police, and it took them 4 months, but they determined that this was more than likely a scenario of captivity. If her grandfather did take this picture, he had this woman in his possession. Still, nobody would even know who she was.
Scary Places in the Netherlands Part 11. Close to the Amstel, a few minutes' walk from the Rembrandtplein, stands a building known as the House of Bloodstains. This eerie name refers to the red scribbles on the exterior of the building, red letters in an archaic handwriting and Kabbalistic symbols, a drawing of a three-master, a sloppy pentagram and an octagram. The red markings are said to have been put there by former Mayor Coenraad van Beuningen 1622 to 1693, who lived in the house at the end of the 17th century. He would supposedly walk along the river, screaming and ranting, dressed in a dirty nightgown, and scribbling on the wall with his own blood, until his own servants overpowered him and dragged him back inside, back to the solitary and locked-up existence that he led there. On some nights, the story goes, you can still hear his insane laughter echoing.
Working overnight at a hospital sounds terrifying. A few years ago, a woman was working an overnight shift in the dementia ward of a hospital, and she went to go check in on one of her patients who had aphasia, which means that she couldn't speak. But it seemed like the older woman was trying to communicate something to the nurse, and the nurse got a really bad vibe. She's like, okay, something's clearly wrong here. When all of a sudden the woman with aphasia starts shaking, she looks terrified and she points at something behind the nurse. But when the nurse turned around, there was nothing behind her. The nurse is terrified, but she finishes her shift. She has to clock out downstairs in the basement of the hospital, and it's like 3 a.m. at this point. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she hears this clanging noise. So she peers around the corner into the hallway, and there's just a knife laying in the middle of the hallway. No explanation. I actually shared this scary story and a bunch of other hospital-related scary stories in this week's episode of the podcast.
Could you last a night in the creepy Crooked Forest? There's something very strange and mysterious about the Crooked Forest. No one knows why, but all of its trees grow crooked and hauntingly with all